Hello, happy
Tuesday. How are you guys?
Fine.
Okay, so let's see. Class 10.
Okay.
Okay.
Grazie per la Domino Stecco, benedictato in Moriaribus e benedictus fructus ventris tuius. Santa Maria, Madre Dei, ora pro nobis et peccatoribus, Sancta Michaela, ora pro nobis
Okay.
Okay.
If you found if you found the revolution exciting, I thought post-revolution would be going down, but it turns out to be even more exciting because this is where we meet the difficulties and the way that the Catholic Church, tried to meet those difficulties. And what makes it exciting is that some of these difficulties are still with us.
No.
So,
Right.
okay, I sent the notes. Let's go through it. Okay, first survival of the church. That's historical gossip 1 to 16, the primary sources 1 to 16. And then certain adjustments that we had to make. Some of them perhaps we might think of as compromises, but I think they were compromised. 1723. And the resurgence really has to do with the what the apostolic delegates, first Leo the 13th apostolic constitution, Quae Mare Sinico, I think that's how you pronounce it, or Sinico, and the provincial council, the Manila Synod of 1907, that was provided for by that constitution. Okay, this is the timeline that we're looking at. You have the first apostolic delegate, his name is Chapelle, arrives in the Philippines at 1900. We already saw that in the previous class. But he meets the friars, bishops, and this is what we will begin with. Well, I mean, more or less, in 1900. Shortly after that meeting, the second and the third Spanish bishops depart from the Philippines. The first Spanish bishop, Ferrero, had already left during the siege of Manila. You recall, there was one archbishop and 4 other bishops in the Philippines, all of them Spanish, of course. No? In 1901, the Protestants come. Actually, they have been coming, but in 1901, they established what they call the Evangelical Union of the Philippine Islands. So there is also an excerpt on this. In 1902, the Iglesia Filipina Independiente is inaugurated. This is the Aglipayan Church. Okay. And then the second apostolic delegate, Gidi, arrives with this apostolic constitution from Leo the 13th, Quae Mare Sinico. In 1903, 1904, the other two other archbishops depart, which means all of them had already left by 1903. And it was then that the American bishops arrived, Doherty, Rooker, Harty, and Hendrick. Taft, who was the Governor General at that time, meets Leo the 13th, as a matter of fact, to try to see if they negotiate certain things that he thought would pacify the islands, Philippines. He also noted at the end of this 2-year period, at the end, by the end of 1904, many of the original friars that were around in 1898 had already departed. Actually, of the 246, only less than 100 were available for the parishes. In 1905, the one big problem that we saw the agrarian problem, if you want. The friar lands, the last of the friar lands were sold. Well, the agrarian, the haciendas. Okay. And then another apostolic delegate, Ambrosio Agius, arrived. So there were 3 apostolic delegates who were sent to try to reorient the church, the Catholic Church in the Philippines. 1906, a landmark. The first Filipino is consecrated and named Bishop of Nueva Cáceres. Unfortunately, he lived only up to 1909. But then by that time, other bishops, Filipino bishops, had already been consecrated. In 1907, we have the Provincial Council of Manila, and we'll have to end here. So up to 1910, more or less. Okay. But just for the first one, let's see. Backtracking a little, let's see a note that the president of the US, the American president, wrote about his thoughts at the time when they won the Spanish-American War, and they found the Philippines in their lap. Okay, this is just a speech that he gave. He was Methodist. He gave to a group of Methodist ministers in 1899. He was in the White House office then. Before you go, I should like to say just a word about the Philippine business. I have been criticized a good deal about the Philippines, but I don't deserve it. The truth is, I didn't want the Philippines. And when they came to us as a gift from the gods, I did not know what to do with them. When the Spanish War broke out, Dewey was at Hong Kong, and I ordered him to go to Manila, and he had to, because if defeated, he had no place to refit on that side of the globe. And if the Dons, the Spaniards, were victorious, they would likely cross the Pacific and ravage our Oregon and California coasts. And so he had to destroy the Spanish fleet, and he did it. But that was as far as I had thought then. When next I realized that the Philippines had dropped into our lap, I confessed that I did not know what to do with them. I sought counsel from all sides, Democrats as well as Republicans, but got little help. I thought first we would only take Manila, then Luzon, the other islands perhaps also. I walked the floor of the White House night after night until midnight, and I'm not ashamed to tell you, gentlemen, that I went down on my knees and prayed God Almighty for light and guidance more than one night. And one night, late, it came to me this way. I don't know how it was, but it came. Number one, that we could not give them back to Spain. That would be cowardly and dishonorable. Number two, that we could not turn them over to France or Germany. That would be bad business and discreditable. Number three, that we could not leave them to themselves. They were unfit for self-government, and they would soon have anarchy and misrule over there, worse than Spain's rule was. Okay? And number four, that there was nothing left for us to do but to take them all and to educate the Filipinos and uplift and civilize and Christianize them, and by God's grace do the very best we could by them as our fellow men for whom Christ also died. Note, so that the president was Protestant. And in the Protestant mind, Catholicism is had a lot of errors. And then I went to bed and went to sleep and slept soundly. And the next morning, I sent for the chief engineer of the War Department, our map maker, and I told him to put the Philippines on the map of the United States. And he pointed to a large map on the wall of his office. And there they are. And there they will stay while I am president. So this was 1903. Okay, so that's William McKinley, President of the United States, in 1903. I mean, but he said this in 1899. Okay. There is a letter. Again, we will look back at the the causes of the revolution, the anti-friar, the claims of being anti-friar, then anti-church, and then anti-religion, and just to bring our minds back to it, he's something from the Jesuits. This is a letter written by, I think it's anonymous, we don't know, 1900. I can't remember anyway. He was writing to the Reverend Father Superior of the Society of Jesus. The Filipino, Bernardo Duron y Polintan, local chieftain of Veruela of the upper reaches of the Agusan, makes known to the father that the new Christians evangelized by the Jesuits fathers have, since the departure of the missionaries of the said society, already abandoned their villages and returned to the hills, their hiding places of old. For they say that since they have taken away the fathers, the Christian religion will no longer be perpetuated among them, and some have now begun to kill each other. But a few good men who remain desire with all their hearts the return of the said missionaries. They have collected 50 pesos with which to buy, ipalit, to bring back one father in order that justice may rule over the land and the men be virtuous. Okay, so we already saw from before that, okay, many people desired that the friars would come back. Okay, so this one now is the result, notes taken by a Dominican secretary of the meeting between Chapelle and the archbishops who were all in Manila at that time. Okay. It is very significant to what in fact they said. At the request of the apostolic delegate, who was Chapelle, the Archbishop of Manila, Nozaleda, spoke, making the following points. First, there's an absolute necessity for a European clergy in the Philippines to carry out the spiritual functions. Moreover, he added that in his opinion, the greater abundance of European clergy there is, the more abundant the harvest that can be gathered. Now, everything in the Filipino priests is contrary to these qualities of the European clergy. The pusillanimity that which afflicts the Filipino priest, timidity, because of which he is reduced to almost nothing in the sight of any European, will give even the enemies occasion to mock him. It's not very clear which enemies he was referring to. The more that the people are enlightened by the Americans, maybe these are the enemies they were referring to, the more frequent religious debates will become. Great struggles against the Protestants await the ministers of the church, which will demand a solid instruction and a full and perfect knowledge of apologetics. And we must be exceedingly fearful that the faith of the people may suffer ruin because of the ignorance and ineptitude of the Filipino priests. When the Archbishop came to this point, he had to answer these two questions. Most probably this was raised by Chapelle. Okay. Ought there to be a Filipino secular clergy? And is it expedient that the Filipino clergy should exist in the future? To the first question, he answered that the Filipino clergy has always existed. And the reasons for this has been the lack of European clergy. As regards the second question, here is what the Bishop of Cebu, Alcocer, said. It is better not to act rashly in this matter. I am convinced that the Filipino priests will disappear of themselves. This opinion of mine is based on the following reasons. Number one, the whole life of a priest should be devoted to work and sacrifice, especially in the present. But the Filipino clergy lacks abnegation and the desire to work. Number two, the pious donations formerly made to the church have greatly diminished, and the parish incomes have greatly decreased. When this condition of affairs becomes clear to the Filipino clergy, who put so much emphasis on the profit to be gotten out of the parishes, very many will flee from embracing the priestly life. The bishops of Nueva Segovia, Campomanes, and Haro, Ferrero, the only ones remaining in the Philippines, assented to the words of the Archbishop of Manila and the Bishop of Cebu. Okay, so I have a note here. Apparently, Chapelle, the apostolic delegates, on hearing this, didn't completely understand the complex situation. Many towns did want the friars back, at times even when there was a Filipino priest. Thus, Agustinians would return to some parishes in Pampanga and Panay, Dominicans in Batanes, Bataan, Cagayan, Isabela, Recoletos in Romblon, Misamis, Palawan, and Franciscans in Camarines and Samar. But it is also true that in 1900, many Ilustrados and Filipino priests strongly opposed to any participation of the friars in the parish ministry. And what Chappelle probably didn't understand in this complex situation, you see, is that the Americans were listening to these Ilustrados. In the reorientation of, in the reorientation of the entire of the Philippines, they were listening to the principales, of course. Okay, let's continue. As a matter, and in fact, when word reached the Filipinos, well, in Manila especially, but not only, you will see that this was, well, you will see this also happened in Pampanga and Ilocos especially. The Filipino clergy, when news reached them of Chappelle, still thinking of allowing the friars to remain and to go back to the original arrangements before the Philippine independence, they started writing to the Pope. And amongst themselves. At last the hour has come. This is a broadside. So it came out in the newspapers. Okay, Filipino Alerta. This is Pangasinan. At last the hour has come in which all of us Filipinos should courageously and unambiguously show our sentiments. The Apostolic Delegate Monsignor Chappelle, wishing to put into action the plan which has long been maturing in the conventos of the religious, is going to prepare our minds under the pretext of visiting the towns for the return of the friars to the parishes. We are Catholics, but we hate the friars because we wish peace and tranquility. And we know that wherever the friar is, as we have seen under Spanish rule, shame is a myth, and terror and calumny shine in all their splendor, making peace impossible. We should reject the allurements of the Apostolic Delegate, for in the end, he has shown himself to be defender of the friar and the executioner of the Filipino clergy. We should scorn his promises, which are only snares with which he attempts to imprison us. Come then, my countrymen, let us not in any way consent that a single friar should take possession of a single parish. If we do not wish that the horrors of which we have been victims during the past regime should be repeated. If they persist in remaining in any town, let us isolate ourselves from them, let us create a vacuum around them, and let us have recourse to our own priests, whom the friars so depreciate. And as a matter of fact, Aguinaldo, who was still in hiding, remember that he surrendered in only 1901, if I recall correctly, came out with a decree, or what seems to be a decree. Later on, we will see that it actually appeared in the newspaper, Filipinas Ante Europa, which was published by Isabelo de los Reyes. So you will see Isabelo de los Reyes coming now out into the picture. So this is what apparently Aguinaldo decreed. Okay, those who accept foreign priests, contrary to my decree of the 10th of March, 1900, previously, will be severely punished. The provisions, this decree came out, it's supposed to come out, to have come out sometime January 1901. The provisions of that decree shall be rigorously complied with at the present time with the following modifications. Number one, all parish priests shall give their secret adhesion to the Filipino authorities of their respective localities and shall privately obtain approval of their appointments from them. If this approval is not obtained, they shall be arrested as enemies. Number two, the confirmation of an appointment will be denied if it is of an enemy of the revolution or of a person who is in favor of the usurping priests or of a person who does not pay the contribution of war corresponding to him. Number three, Monsignor Chappelle is declared a prelate of the enemy from the moment he raised the American flag above his palace. Hence, not only he, but all those who accept parish priests, governors, and prelates who are not Filipinos will be treated as enemies. Okay, so now these things become sharper. This is now from Isabelo de los Reyes. Let's just very quickly read this footnote. He's Ilocano. He was imprisoned in Spain after the 1896 revolution, but then he was allowed. He had been released. He then founded Filipinas Anti-Europa, a nationalist newspaper in Madrid, to combat American pretensions to annex the Philippines and to champion the aspirations of the Filipino clergy to administer the church in the Philippines. He is regarded as a co-founder of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente, the Aglipayan Church. So in 1900, he wrote a letter to the Filipino clergy, which he published. He says, the Manila Press says that I am working on the Vatican so as to get it to recognize in the Filipino priests their rights to occupy exclusively the bishoprics and parishes of the Philippines. This is correct from the time that Aguinaldo won his victory. But what I lack is precisely what is indispensable, and now he's asking it from them. That is an authorization signed by you, the Filipino clergy, with the greatest number possible of parish seals. In that authorization, you can place these or similar instructions. Number one, that our agent, the agent of the Filipino priests, Isabelo de los Reyes, should take care to show the most profound respect for His Holiness the Pope and for his representatives. Number two, that he is never to use this authorization for any complaint which can be taken as a disrespectful imposition on the Holy Father, nor for any newspaper campaign which can bring dishonor on the church and on religion. Number three, that he will limit himself to presenting with the most profound respect to the Pope and his representatives the complaints of the Filipino clergy, giving his word of honor to be truthful in his attacks and not to pursue anything else but the peace which is so necessary to the interests of the church in the Philippines. But he will maintain, with all the firmness compatible with the proper veneration towards the Holy Father, the rights of the Filipino clergy to occupy the bishoprics and parishes of the Philippines to the exclusion of all others. So they were moving then and making a primary point, a primary issue, the native clergy, okay, and the episcopal arrangements in the Philippines. Okay, in the meantime, the Protestants were coming in. Okay, again, it's good to read this footnote first. Several Protestant denominations arrived in the Philippines between 1899 and 1905. To present a unified witness to the Filipinos, in April 1901, they organized what they're called the Evangelical Union. Almost as Philip II had done 4 centuries earlier, they divided the country among themselves. The provinces between Manila and the Gulf of Lingayen to the Methodists, the southern provinces of Luzon to the Presbyterians, okay, Laguna, etc. Northern Luzon to the United Brethren, Ilocos, etc. Panay and Negros to the Baptists and Presbyterians, and Manila, free for all the churches. This list was amended in 1902, 1903, 1904. Okay. Now, it should be noted that the Episcopalians, under the leadership of the ecumenical pioneer Bishop Charles Brent, refused to be a party to the proselytizing efforts of the Evangelical Union, directing Episcopalian efforts instead to evangelizing non-Christians in northern Luzon or Mindanao, so Baguio, the Igorots, and to the Chinese and foreign communities. So the Episcopalians did not think, oh, you know, you leave the Catholics alone. It's the non-Christians that whom we will evangelize. But okay, what did this say? The Constitution. So they met. These Protestants. The Constitution declared that the name of the new society should be the Evangelical Union of the Philippine Islands, that we should respect the practices and principles of each mission, and that we should use the name the Evangelical Church of the Philippines, placing the denominational name in parentheses as follows: La Iglesia Evangelica de las Islas Filipinas, okay, in parentheses, Methodist Episcopal. Okay, now, what did they want to achieve, really? This is written by a Methodist. His name is Homer Stuntz. He was writing this in earlier than 1904. He published the book, which records this in 1904. Protestantism is not in the Philippines to gloat over the faults which may be proven to have existed in the life and methods of those who have been religious leaders of the Filipino people. Nor is Protestantism concerned simply to wage a war of denunciation against the errors in doctrine, which so grievously distort the message of Christ, Catholic doctrine. It may destroy, but building is the sore need of the hour. With its positive program of intellectual, spiritual, moral, and social fulfillment, Protestantism is in the Philippines for the same reason that she is in all the countries of Europe and South America, because her testimony is needed to counteract those errors of Roman Catholic teaching which put in peril the salvation of the individual sinner and thus jeopardize, that was the original word, the whole program of Christ for this world as well as the next. Okay, so that's the Protestants, what they wanted to achieve here in the early 1900s. And in fact, the biggest tool that they had, or one of the biggest tools that they have, was the public school system, which the Americans put out. And they put their American teachers who were Protestants. So this is written by the Bishop of Haro, American Bishop of Haro, later on when they had come. So he wrote this looking at what the Protestant had been achieving from 1900 to 1904. It's interesting that these bishops would write directly to the president of the U.S. And this was all captured in this book, Theodore Roosevelt and Catholics, written in 1956. The teachers who are educating the children and the officials who are conducting the system are, with the exception of an insignificant number, hostile to the Catholic religion. Of the 35 or 36 division superintendents, only one is a Catholic. And the number of them are ex-clergymen who came here with the missionary spirit to, convert the people and lift them out of Catholic darkness, but found greater pecuniary gain in the school department. So they started as missionaries and decided to go to the schools. It is to be suspected that they carry with them still something of their proselytizing zeal in the schools. The same must be said of a number of American teachers who are likewise ex-missionaries. Of the native teachers, I fear, a large proportion of them are appointed by local political influence, and the result is that very many of them are professed haters to the Catholic Church and use their influence. And the maestro here acquires much of that influence to the damage of the faith of the children. In a recent trip through the province of Occidental Negros, the only province I have thus far been able to visit thoroughly, the complaints were made to me in nearly every town that the native teachers were exercising a perverting influence religiously. And parents came to me with tears rolling down their faces, begging that I try to do something to have Catholic teachers placed in the schools so that the faith may not be taken from their little ones. Okay, now let's go to the asterisks first. Okay. Isabela de los Reyes and Aglipay begin to move. So they arrived in Manila from Ilocos and met with a group of American Protestant leaders to plan for a break with Catholicism. So they met with the Protestants. Aglipay had fought as a guerrilla leader in the Philippine-American War. He surrendered in May 1901 and took the oath of allegiance to the Americans. Still under the censure of excommunication, he retired to Ilocos. By October 1901, de los Reyes, who had by then rejected Catholic doctrine in favor of an eclectic and fundamentally rationalist theology of his own, had apparently stirred Aglipay into action. And this fellow Homer Stuntz that we saw, we met later writing the book, no? Homer Stuntz, Methodist missionary, was one of those who participated in this meeting that was held in November 1901. Okay. The conference was held in the office of the American Bible Society in the Walled City, Manila. Those present were Reverend Father Goodrich, Agent American Bible Society, and then Rogers, Presbyterian Church, McLaughlin of myself, Methodist, and Senor Isabella de los Reyes, a Filipino gentleman of good education with an inveterate fondness for agitation. We spent several hours in hearing the first disclosure of a plan to rend the Roman Church in the Philippines in twain. Senor Aglipay, with great clearness, sent forth the situation as he saw it. He pictured the popular hatred for the friars as we had seen it. He pointed out the systematic ill treatment of the native clergy by the foreign friar and the unrest which this caused among the entire native community. He showed us proofs of the passionate fervor of all Filipinos for their own islands. He then told us that he proposed to lead in the establishment of an independent Catholic Church in the Philippines, and he wished us to make common cause with him. The first item on his program was separation from the papacy and complete autonomy in the Philippines. His next step was to declare for and stand for Catholic doctrine in its purity. Okay, so that was the spanner in the works as far as the Protestants were concerned. We pointed out to him the impossibility of an attempt to unite with a movement which did not make the scriptures the rule and guide in doctrine and life, and urged him to study the situation more carefully and throw his strength into the Protestant movement. If he could not do that, we all represented the certainty of failure, if only a program of negation and protest were entered upon, and secured a promise that he would carefully consider the question of the endorsement of the Word of God, marriage of the clergy, and the abolition of Mariolatry. So, well, at the beginning, so that was not part of what the Aglipays, they set up the church still believing in Our Lady, etc. But as we know, their doctrine began to fall apart. In fact, much later on, we know that the original Aglipays remained Trinitarian, but then there is another subsect of the Aglipays which does not believe in the Trinity. In any case, okay, the stage was set. In any case, as far as Aglipay is concerned, this is on the side of those who were still Filipino clergy who were loyal to Rome and who wanted to be. One of them is this Manuel Rojas, who was a secular priest, close collaborator of Mariano Sevilla, whom we had met earlier during the revolution, and who continued the leadership of Filipino priests in the Archdiocese of Manila, defending their rights against both Spanish bishops and American authorities who were intent on the elimination of the Filipino clergy and keeping them loyal to the Holy See in the face of schismatic tendencies on the part of Aglipay. So, what did he write? He was writing this to Giovanni Guidi. This is the second. He was writing it to the second apostolic delegate in 1902. The Filipino clergy comprises at present some 800 to 900 individuals, approximately distributed among the 5 dioceses. As in any group, there are among them those who are of indisputable merit. There are likewise those who are far from exemplary. In general, the Filipino clergy is distinguished for its docility, sobriety, and submission to the legitimate authorities. But there may also be observed in it negligence, sloth, and a relaxation of morals. The most controverted point is their capacity to rule the Philippine Church. This point should be divided into absolute and relative. The Filipino clergy cannot be denied the absolute capacity to govern the Philippines, inasmuch as its individuals belong to the same race as the race of the Filipinos. One cannot deny them what is granted to the others. If Filipinos intervene in the governing of the country in civil matters, likewise, the clergy can intervene for the government of the church. With regard to its relative capacity, that is, the question as to whether at the present the existing Filipino clergy can assume the government of these churches, it could be answered that, as a matter of fact, since the revolution of 1896 broke out, the Filipino clergy has, with the greatest merit, been maintaining religion in the whole country. What the Filipino clergy needs and desires is a perfect higher education. What is the implication? Maybe from a relative perspective, maybe not yet, but give them education, you will see that they will be able, because they have maintained religion in the whole. Okay. From an objective perspective, objective from another perspective, from the Americans, what did he see? Writing in 1902, this is an American military chaplain in Manila, Father William McKinnon, who writes to an archbishop in Minnesota. Okay, this fellow apparently is heroic. He died shortly afterwards, after 1902, from tending to those stricken by the cholera epidemic in Manila. What did he write? It is awfully discouraging to those who know how things are here to see indifferent the authorities in Rome seem to be in sending some remedy. See, basically what remedy are you looking for? There is no leadership in the church. Yeah. I mean, the Spanish bishops were saying one thing, and that they were really preparing to go, and there are no new bishops coming. The Protestants are very active, and we are doing nothing. I can assure you, a good American bishop who would take hold and clean up some of the corruption in the parishes would be the greatest blessing that anyone could send us. The native padres who have most of the parishes here are a bad lot. And unless something is done soon, the whole archipelago will be lost to the church. The church can live without this property. At that time, we will see this, they were very much engaged, the American government and even the apostolic delegate, with the friar lands. Friar lands, the property of the pious associations, charities, etc. But she cannot live with rotten, corrupt clergy such as we have here in the native priests. They all seem more bent on propagating the race than they are in propagating the faith. I have gone everywhere I could reach, and talked and lectured till I am nearly worn out, but it does not seem to do much good more than it is a check on the work of the Protestant missionaries. Okay. So, then what happens? This is now Philippine clergy, Manila. And there was also in Pampanga and in Ilocos, as I said, writing in 1902 to the Pope. The Filipino priests undersigned have agreed to maintain firmly our rights, to occupy exclusively the archbishoprics, bishoprics, provisorates, chapters, parishes, and the direction of seminaries and all other ecclesiastical prelacies in the Philippines. If the delegate of the Pope, Chapelle, should violate those rights, we will separate ourselves from him, because no one has the obligation.
Hola. Hello. 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 Oh, sorry. You know that this one was called the Archbishop's of the Deltas. Authority, still authority, but then the authority was asked the Holy Father to send Christian brothers here to counter the Protestant influence for the rich. And then the Christian brothers said their person is to start advocating the poor, not the rich. But I think he deemed the Pope. So the Pope asked us how to come here. Then they started here because I see in Asal you have the pictures of the graduates on the website. At the beginning, you see all of them. These are not the services, but not the Guyana, the Surianga, because of this Muslim marketing. 1911. No. Maria. Hello. Oh.
Okay. Goodness. Okay. So let's continue. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait.
Because no one has the obligation.
Okay. So in such a case, you have it?
Yes.
Okay. In such a case, they threaten now. In such a case, we will form a Filipino church with the same dogmas as the Roman one, and those who sign this will form a council to recognize bishops and to issue decrees necessary to maintain the new discipline and apostolic good customs. And now they ask, they name. To execute this agreement, we name our brother and fellow priest, Father Gregorio Aglipay, who will receive instructions from us. We place in him our entire confidence, approving whatever he may do, ask, and maintain in virtue of this authorization which we confer on him. And we offer to this priest our unconditional cooperation in everything connected with this matter. It's interesting to know how Isabelo de los Reyes narrates the actual inauguration. Okay, again here there's a footnote. It's good to read this. Aglipay had in fact vacillated. He came out with the 20th of August manifesto denying that the former schism was contemplated. But then de los Reyes moved ahead. Without previous consultation, he named priests and laymen as officials of the Iglesia Filipina Independiente. And he named not only well-known anti-Catholics like Padre de Tavera, but also Father Barlen, who was going to be in the future a consecrated bishop of Nueva Cáceres. Some of these people, whom he included, now wrote to the newspapers rejecting the new church.
Yeah.
But in 1902, September, later on, the month afterwards, the first of the what was called fundamental epistles of the IFI appeared, with Aglipay now signing as Obispo Max. This epistle argued that the episcopate was an ecclesiastical rank, not a sacrament. Though, and that's why he could now, in fact, that's why he could name himself as bishop. Though he made repeated and successful attempts to obtain episcopal consecration from Anglicans and Old Catholics, he was never. Later on, some of the Aglipayan bishops got themselves consecrated as bishop by the Episcopalians, which, as we know, I mean, the line was broken already, so they're not even bishops. But supported by anti-clerics, Masons, and Protestant missionaries, the IFI spread rapidly. Though only 36 of the 600 Filipino priests joined the schismatic church, 25% of the Catholic population followed them. This is the way Isabella described on the strength of the popularity, both for being patriotic and being socialist or pro-labor, that I enjoyed in Manila, I proclaimed the rationalist schism on the 3rd of August 1902 in the labor meeting. Actually, the Aglipayan Church and all of these things, socialism and labor, etc., have always been, they've always been involved in such political unrest. I succeeded in bringing about the schism against wind and tide, against the deep-rooted Catholicism in the Filipinos, against the conservative Filipinos and the Americans, who looked with distrust on my reforms, believing that they were aiming at another political revolt, which is an error, and against the Filipino priests, including Monsignor Aglipay, who on the 20th of the same month of August 1902 circulated a printed manifesto disapproving the schism. So it seems to be correct. No? At first, it was only Isabella who was pushing it. Hence, the true and only founder of the Iglesia Filipina was the undersigned. Then came Monsignor Aglipay, the month afterwards, with his extraordinarily tireless activity, and especially because he, being well read in rationalist books, accepted my religious radicalism, and he gave a strong push to the schism. I did the thinking and the directing, and Aglipay did the executing, spreading the movement through the provinces with a success that neither he nor I nor any Filipino could have dreamt of. Okay, so 1902. Now, the next one is interesting. This is from Taft, William Taft, who was the kind of Governor General there. And here he's talking about the churches and the conventos, and it is in relation with the schism. Let me call your attention. He's writing to the various officials of the American government in the Philippines. Let me call your attention to one phase of the schism, which is most important, and that is as to the possession of churches and conventos. Executive officers have no function whatever to the determination of the question, who owns private property? These are questions to be decided by courts, which are open to all parties. The only function of the executive is to see to it that the peace is not disturbed by attempts on the part of one not in possession of property and to deprive him of it. Where, therefore, the priest of the Roman Catholic Church shall be in possession representing his church, it is not your function to decide that the people of the town who, because they may have assisted in building the church, believe themselves to be the owners of the church, may oust him and may let the priest of the independent Filipino Catholic Church into possession. Whatever you may think of the merits of the claims put forward by the townsfolk, it is your duty to preserve the possession of the Roman Catholic priest. Beyond this, you cannot go. Such rights as the people of a town may have to ownership of the church property must be asserted in the courts. On the other hand, should a priest in possession of the church property allowed to be used for the service and ceremonies of the Filipino church, Aglipay, it is not for you to decide it by dispossessing him of the church, because the change which is effected is not effected by a disturbance of the peace. And the remedy for the wrong done, if it be wrong, can only be had in courts. The question is one of actual possession, not of constructive possession. Indeed, the question, as far as you and the presidentes are concerned, is one really not of possession at all, but of the disturbance of the peace. Again, a little bit of explanation here, and then see the effect of this circular. The municipal governments were generally run by Americans and anti-clerical Filipinos who tended to favor the Aglipayans, as a matter of fact. Even though the majority of the population did not share their sentiments, they feared to oppose those in authority. The abuse of political powers was most notable in the case of the possession of churches. Where the Catholic priest had become Aglipayan, the municipal government allowed him to take the church with him. Where there was no resident Catholic priest, and you know that there were very few, no? The Aglipayans frequently took over the church, sometimes by violence, sometimes with the connivance of the municipal officials who claimed to own all church property. In the Diocese of Jaro, for example, Bishop Rooker, later on when they came, the American bishops later on, faced 400 cases where Catholic church property were seized by the schismatics. The time and expenses needed for bishops to pursue all these cases through the courts was prohibitive. So this was what was happening at that time. Now, what do the Protestants say? Okay, this is written by Homer Stuntz. Recall, Methodist. The Protestants were gleeful about what was happening.
Oh, of course.
It is so. What did he say? It is a Protestant about the Aglipayan movement. It is a Filipino movement. It throws off the yoke of the Pope and cuts all other ties of a foreign character. Its entire ministry, from the Arzobispo to the humblest padre, is Filipino. It is altogether of the soil, and therefore he who does not support it is not a good Filipino. He does not love his fatherland unless he joins the independent Filipino Catholic Church. This form of pressure is very effective. It brings thousands into the ranks of Aglipayanos who have precious little concern about merely religious matters. They habitually stand up for anything that exalts the Philippines, hence they put down their names and accept places on the committees which Aglipay leaves in charge of his interests in every place where a church is established. The success of Aglipay cuts the Catholic Church to the quick. Therefore, friar haters welcome the movement. Any weapon that will give promise of humbling the haughty, tyrannical friar is welcomed and used most lustily. The same motive leads hundreds to welcome Protestantism, as they suppose that our first business is to fight Rome. When they find out the spiritual and moral demands which Protestantism makes, they flinch. It was not for this that they desired a new religion. To a very great degree, the immediate visible success of the movement is due to this cause. Its easy program of religious reformation attracts thousands. It promises a better order of things, but makes no spiritual or moral demands. Priests may come into the movement and keep their mistresses and continue their gambling. Aglipay himself has never been accused of immorality or gaming, but he sets up no standard of purity in his priesthood or among his people. The cockpit, games of cards and dice, the Bino habit, and all other national vices come into the new church without direct rebuke. This, its real weakness, gives it apparent strength. Because of this, it is enabled to count its members by the million within less than 2 years from its birth. Okay. Now, moving now, adjustment. The second part is adjustment. What the Catholic.
Di pa tayo tapos. Baka ano lang, extra class. Extra class.
First part, there are 2 more parts.
Hindi pa tayo tuloy. Hanggang 6. Hindi stress ah.
Okay, let's. This is Bishop Rucker. I'm sorry, Hendrik, who is the bishop. I forget now. Hendrik Cebu, writing to Roosevelt. Okay, in 1904. And this has to do with what the circular of Taft. You asked me what I want. I would reply briefly. I want the provisions of the Treaty of Paris to be carried out promptly by the government in the sense in which they are written. I do not consider the executive order of Mr. Taft as a compliance with the provisions of the treaty. But on the contrary, it is a practical confiscation of church property on the part of the municipalities, acting through the insular government. It is the duty of the United States to preserve these properties to the Catholic Church against all others. And so, okay, with this, we will close this whole issue of the Aglipay movement. In July 1905, the Philippine Supreme Court ruled in favor of the Catholic Church in the case of, this is Nueva Cáceres Barlin versus Ramirez, who is the only Nueva Cáceres Catholic priest to go over to the Aglipayans. What happened was that, the court decided to give back the church, Catholics. With this precedent, other cases were resolved fast. By 1908, all the disputed churches and conventors had been restored to the Catholic Church, a big blow to the Aglipayan movement. Today, Aglipayans claim to comprise about 6.7% of the population, 6 to 8 million, though the 2010 Philippine census recorded only 1%, 916,000. Okay. Look, Father Dennis,
Yes.
we have We have quite a bit to go. Either we go very fast, or and finish today, or we go in good time and maybe have another, maybe just 45 minutes tomorrow. What do you say?
Tomorrow.
Huh?
Okay, tomorrow. Tomorrow, let's meet again.
Okay, so,
Tomorrow.
no.
So,
Well, we still have time.
Yeah.
Okay.
We still have time to finish all the way up to 5 o'clock. All right?
Okay.
Okay.
So, okay, we put aside the Agliparian movement. We know that it's still there, the Agliparian Church, but okay, much of its bite was resolved by 1905, 1908. Okay, but then early on, there's still these two problems: the friar lands well, the reorganization of the church and what to do with the friars here in the Philippines. Okay, so. Taft writes well. This is William Taft. He actually addresses Pope Leo the 13th. He went there and addressed the Pope. Okay, and he had this idea that well, we should try to implement social justice. Okay, in the question of the friar lands, and this is the way he summarizes the whole situation, and I think it's very good. The transfer of sovereignty and all governmental property rights and interests from the Crown of Spain to the United States in the Philippine Islands, contained in the Treaty of Paris, was a transfer from a government between which and the Church of Rome there had been in these islands the closest association in property, religion, and politics, to a government which, by the law of its being, is absolutely prevented from having such association with any church. This transfer had been preceded by two revolutions among the Filipino people against Spain. Popular hostility was chiefly manifested against the members of four religious orders who had, in addition to their clerical duties as parish priests, been charged by the Spanish government with the performance of a burden of local political and police duties, and in the performance had been held responsible by the people for the oppression of which it was said that Spain was guilty. Three of these orders were owners of large tracts of valuable agricultural lands. And in each revolution, the hostility towards the members of the religious orders was in provinces where land lay, agrarian as well as political. The justice or injustice of this hostility is, as I conceive, aside from the issue. It exists, and it is the result of years of peace and war. It cannot be ignored. The members of these orders have not yet returned to their parishes, which are being administered by the native clergy, and they have not yet resumed possession of their lands. An attempt by them to assume the rights of landlords or to become parish priests again will, it is confidently believed, seriously disturb the peace and order of the islands. And so this is what he proposes to Leo XIII. On behalf of the Philippine government, it is proposed to buy the lands of the religious orders, with the hope that the funds thus furnished may lead to their withdrawal from the islands, and if necessary, a substitution therefore as parish priests of other priests whose presence would be dangerous to public order. Actually, what William Taft wanted to do, and this is what we can read very quickly in the asterisk, is that the purpose of social justice would also be achieved. It was professed by Americans who wanted to sell the land on easy terms to the small farmer, but this was not achieved. Why? In the last years of the Spanish regime, most of the haciendas were transferred to new corporations in which the orders continued to be majority stockholders, though technically no longer the owners. The reason for them doing this is they were afraid that the government, the Spanish government in the Philippines would become anti-clerical as it was in the Spain, and would appropriate the property as they were doing in Spain. So this is what the friars did here in the Philippines. Even when the difficulties arising from this situation were surmounted by negotiation, those who in the end benefited from the settlements were relatively affluent Filipinos. These were people who belonged to the upper class of influence and power, who came forward to make their feelings known to the Americans, and whom the American administration had to win over to the new dispensation. In the main, they were inquilino-type owners, not the kasamas who belonged to the lower classes. Okay, how did the Vatican take it? And this is a summary that Taft made when he addressed the Notre Dame University in Indiana in 1904. The answer of the Vatican contained a general acquiescence in the desire of the government of the United States to purchase the friars' lands, and an announcement of the Vatican's intention to effect a change in the personnel of the priests in the island by a gradual substitution for the Spanish friars of priests of other nationalities, with the ultimate purpose of fitting Filipinos for the clergy, and a proposal that all the matters pending should be turned over for settlement to a conference between an apostolic delegate to be sent to the Philippine Islands and the officers of the insular government. It was further proposed, and that is proposed by the Americans to Leo the 13th. It was further proposed that this contract, the contract about the sale of the friar lands between the government of these islands and the Vatican for the purchase of the lands, should already have a condition by which the Vatican would agree to withdraw the friars in the course of 3 years. So more than this, what the Pope Leo said, okay, gradually this would happen. Now, to this condition of the 3 years, the Vatican declined to agree. It was willing to make a definite contract for arbitration, but not to withdraw the friars from the islands. And the Vatican gives 3 reasons. First, because that was a question of religious discipline, which it did not think ought to form a term of a commercial contract. Second, because it did not desire by such stipulation to reflect upon the Spanish religious orders and thus give apparent support to the slanders which had been published against the orders by their enemies. And third, because such an agreement would be offensive to Spain. And so the friars, the friar lands, the solution to the friar lands was okay, but the question about what to do with the friars and what to do with the native clergy was still, although there was openness now, was still to be resolved. And this is what we will resolve tomorrow. We only actually have a few more slides to see up to 23, but we shall continue tomorrow. Tomorrow we can meet at 4:15 if you want and finish at 5.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, et in hora mortis nostre.
Ora pro nobis Sancta Maria, ora pro nobis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
Hallelujah, hallelujah.